In the dense, suffocating jungles of the Pacific, American soldiers were locked in a brutal fight for their lives. Their legendary Thompson Submachine Gun, heavy, expensive, and a pain to produce, was struggling. Facing Japanese forces who were masters of close-quarters combat, the U.S. needed an equalizer, and they needed it fast. They didn't find it in some marvel of engineering. They found it in this, a weapon made of stamped metal costing just $20. This is the story of how the cheap, unassuming grease gun became the unlikely tool that gave American GIs a deadly edge in the final, brutal days of the war in the Pacific. This isn't a story about the most famous gun of the war, or the prettiest. It's a story about a tool born of pure, desperate necessity. A story about how, in the island-hopping nightmare, where battles were won and lost by inches, the simplest, ugliest, and most disposable weapon became one of the most effective. We'll look at the sheer horror of jungle combat that made a weapon like this a necessity, explore its revolutionary, cost-slashing design, and follow it into the hell of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, where its unique traits gave American troops a crucial advantage against a fanatical enemy. This is the story of a weapon that proves that in war, sometimes the best solution isn't the one that's built to last, but the one that's built to win. To get why the M3 grease gun was such a big deal, you first have to understand the place that created it. The Pacific theater of World War II was a strategic nightmare, unlike anything the world had ever seen. This wasn't the rolling fields of France. This was a war fought on 1,000 tiny islands, in primordial jungles, and across razor-sharp coral. The ground itself was trying to kill you. Imagine you're a young Marine in 1943, wading ashore on an island like New Guinea. The heat is a physical thing, a crushing 100-degree weight with nearly 100% humidity that saps your strength before you even fire a shot. The air is thick with the smell of rot and strange vegetation. The jungle itself is a claustrophobic hell where you can't see more than 20 feet in front of your face, and the canopy blots out the sun, plunging everything into a permanent twilight. And in that green hell, the enemy was waiting. The soldiers of the Imperial Japanese Army were some of the most tenacious fighters in modern history. Their entire doctrine was built on aggression and a mastery of their environment. They didn't fight in neat lines. They were ghosts in the jungle, using complex networks of tunnels, caves, and camouflage spider holes. They were masters of the ambush, the infiltration, and the terrifying last-ditch banzai charge. While their bolt-action Arisaka rifles were generally outclassed by American semi-autos, they turned every island into a fortress where fights were intimate, brutal affairs. This was a war of grenades, bayonets, and sudden, frantic bursts of automatic fire at ranges so close you could see the look on your enemy's face.
Now, consider the American infantryman's main tools. First, the M1 Garand. An icon, yes, and its semi-automatic fire was a huge advantage. But the thing was, at over 9 pounds and nearly 4 feet long, the Garand was a beast to drag through the jungle. Its powerful .30-06 cartridge was overkill for a fight happening 10 feet away, and its 8-round clip could be emptied in seconds during a sudden ambush. The other key weapon was the one designed for this kind of work, the Thompson Submachine Gun, the Tommy gun. An American legend, beautifully crafted from milled steel and fine wood, firing the big .45 ACP slug. And yet, for all its fame, the Tommy gun was deeply flawed for the war in the Pacific. First, the weight. The M1A1 Thompson weighed over 10 pounds, empty. Lugging that slab of steel through the mud and heat was exhausting. Second, and maybe more importantly, was the cost. The Thompson was a work of art from a different era. In 1939, one cost the government over $200. Even with simplified wartime models, the price was still around $45 by 1944. When you're fighting a global war and need to equip millions of guys, that cost is just unsustainable. Finally, there was its performance. The Thompson's Chicago typewriter reputation came from its blistering rate of fire, up to 700 rounds per minute. In combat, that meant a soldier could rip through a 30-round magazine in less than 3 seconds, making controlled fire difficult and wasting ammo. Worse, its open bolt design was a magnet for the Pacific's greatest assets: mud, sand, and grime. Keeping a Thompson running required constant, meticulous cleaning, a luxury you don't have in a firefight. A jammed weapon was a death sentence. So, the U.S. military had a huge problem. It was fighting a close-quarters brawl in the world's worst environments with a submachine gun that was too heavy, too expensive, and too finicky. They needed something cheap, simple, and rugged enough to work every single time. They needed a disposable tool for winning. They needed the grease gun. The story of the M3 is a classic tale of American industrial might. The U.S. Army Ordnance Board had been watching Europe, seeing how the Germans with their MP-40 and the British with their Sten gun were ditching old-school manufacturing. Their guns were ugly, but they were cheap, fast to make, and they worked. America needed one of its own. In early 1942, the Army laid out its demands: a shoulder-fired, .45 caliber weapon that was, above all, cheap and easy to mass-produce. They wanted full auto capability, scrapping an earlier idea for semi-auto fire to keep things as simple as possible. The challenge wasn't taken up by a famous gun company, but the guide lamp division of General Motors, a company that used to make headlights. This was the arsenal of democracy in action, turning civilian industry into a weapon of war. The lead designer, George Hyde, and FGM's Frederick Sampson understood the assignment perfectly. Their job wasn't to create a beautiful heirloom, it was to create a functional, reliable bullet hose using the absolute minimum of materials and skilled labor.
The prototype, the T-20, was ready for trials by November 1942, and the results were stunning. It fired over 5,000 rounds with only 2 failures. It was simple, reliable, and exactly what the Army was looking for. On December 12, 1942, it was officially adopted as the United States Submachine Gun caliber .45 M3, with production kicking off in early 1943. So what made it so revolutionary? First, just look at it. It looks less like a gun and more like something from a mechanic's toolbox, which is exactly how it got the nickname grease gun. The body wasn't carved from steel, it was 2 halves of plain sheet metal, stamped out like car fenders and welded together. The whole thing had only 73 parts. Only the bolt and barrel required any serious machining. An unskilled worker on an assembly line could be trained to make M3 parts in a heartbeat. This simplicity crushed the cost. While a Thompson could cost over $200, the final price tag on an M3 was about $20. For the price of 1 Tommy gun, the Army could field an entire squad's worth of M3s. In a war of logistics, that one fact was a game-changer. Now let's talk mechanics. The M3 is a simple blowback weapon firing from an open bolt. Pull the trigger, the bolt slams forward, strips around, fires it, and the energy from the shot blows the bolt back to do it all over again. It's mechanically simple, with very few parts to break. Crucially, the guts of the gun were built with loose tolerances, meaning it could function even when it was full of dirt, a massive advantage. One of its most defining features is the rate of fire. The designers intentionally used a heavy bolt to slow the cyclic rate down to a lazy 450 rounds per minute. Compared to the Thompson's frantic buzz, the M3 had a distinctive chug, chug, chug. But that slow rhythm was a tactical masterstroke. It made the weapon incredibly controllable. A soldier could pop off single shots with a quick trigger pull, or keep a burst on target without the muzzle trying to climb to the sky. It also meant a 30-round magazine lasted longer, saving precious ammo. The ergonomics were purely functional. It had a collapsing wire stock that could be pulled off and used as a cleaning rod. Stock collapsed, the gun was just under 22 inches long, perfect for paratroopers and vehicle crews. At just over 8 pounds, it was a full 2 pounds lighter than the Thompson, a difference any soldier would feel at the end of a long day. And in a brilliant touch for the Pacific, the ejection port cover also acted as the safety, sealing the action from dirt when closed.
Of course, when the M3 first reached the troops in mid-1944, the reaction wasn't exactly glowing. Imagine being used to the solid feel of a Garand or a Thompson, and then being handed this cheap-looking pipe. Soldiers didn't trust it. It felt flimsy. Many troops getting ready for D-Day preferred their heavy but proven Thompsons. It would take the hard lessons of combat for soldiers to see past the M3's ugly exterior and realize that this cheap tool was exactly the advantage they needed.
We're about to follow the grease gun into the thick of the fighting on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. If you're finding this look into military history valuable, take a second to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. It really helps the channel out, and you won't miss our future videos. Now, let's see what happened when this $20 gun met the fanatical defenders of the Japanese Empire. While the M3 grease gun first saw major action in Europe during the Normandy invasion, its true calling was halfway across the world in the Pacific. Though it was deployed there in smaller numbers than in Europe, its unique traits made it the perfect tool for the unique horrors of that theater. As the war ground into 1944 and 1945, the M3 started showing up in the hands of the units that needed it most. U.S. Marine Corps tank crews on Iwo Jima and Okinawa loved it. The Thompson was just too big to be used effectively inside the cramped hull of a Sherman tank. The M3, with its collapsing stock and tiny frame, was perfect. It could be stowed away and brought into action in a second if the crew had to bail out or fight off infantry. The OSS, America's Special Operations Agency, also armed guerrilla forces with the M3 because it was so simple to use and maintain. But the true test came in the infernos of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Here, the Japanese defenders had turned the islands into interlocking fortresses of bunkers, pillboxes, and miles of underground tunnels. This is where the M3 went from being a cheap gun to a decisive tactical tool. The number one factor was its controllable firepower. When clearing a bunker, the Thompson's high rate of fire was just spray and pray. The grease gun's slow, chugging rhythm let a Marine walk his fire onto a target, suppress a machine gun slit with a controlled burst, and save his ammo. That controllable automatic fire was devastating for breaking up Japanese counterattacks. Then there was the sheer stopping power of the .45 ACP round. It's a big, slow, heavy slug of lead. It doesn't just poke a hole in a target, it hits it, dumps all its energy, and stops it cold. In the frenzy of a banzai charge or a tunnel fight, that immediate, brutal stopping power was everything. Facing a wall of these heavy slugs was not only lethal, but psychologically terrifying for enemy troops. The M3's compact size was also critical. A Marine clearing a cave on Iwo Jima could crawl into a tunnel with the M3 at the ready, something that was almost impossible with a long Garand. The gun wasn't perfect, though. The fine volcanic dust of Iwo Jima and the soupy mud of Okinawa could still cause jams. The original M3 had a cocking handle that was prone to breaking, and the magazine release could be bumped accidentally, dropping a full mag at the worst possible moment. The sights were crude at best, but this was the trade-off. The M3 wasn't built for marksmanship. It was a close-range room broom, and for that job, it was perfect.
The soldiers and Marines who used it developed what's been called a begrudging affection for the gun. It was ugly and crude, but it was light, compact, and when you needed to fill a bunker with lead, it worked. It didn't win the battles on its own, but in the hands of troops in the war's most brutal conditions, the M3 grease gun provided a critical edge. It was the equalizer that helped tip the scales in the War of Inches. The end of World War II didn't spell the end for the M3. In many ways, its story was just getting started. The very things that made it a success, simplicity, reliability, and low cost, gave it a service life far longer than anyone expected for a disposable weapon. After the war, the expensive Thompson was declared obsolete. The M3 and its improved successor, the M3A1, became the standard submachine gun for the U.S. military. Introduced in 1944, the M3A1 was even simpler. It got rid of the braking cocking handle, replacing it with a simple finger hole in the bolt to pull it back. Based directly on feedback from the field, these changes perfected the design. Just 5 years later, when war broke out in Korea, the grease gun was there in greater numbers than the Thompson had ever been. Its reliability in the bitter cold and dirt of the Korean winter proved its worth once again. Its service continued into the Vietnam War. While the M16 was the new rifle on the block, helicopter pilots and crew chiefs often carried an M3 in their cramped cockpits. It was smaller than an M16, but offered way more firepower than a pistol if they got shot down. Incredibly, the M3 grease gun remained in the U.S. military's inventory for tank crews all the way into the mid-1990s. Tankers in the M1 Abrams could still be issued the very same submachine gun their grandfathers might have carried on Okinawa. That's a 50-year run for a weapon designed in a few months and built for $20.
The gun even carved out a place in pop culture. Its crude, aggressive look gave it a bad boy reputation, cemented by the classic 1967 film The Dirty Dozen. For a generation, the grease gun became the signature weapon of rugged anti-heroes. What the grease gun story really tells us is that in the brutal calculus of war, the best weapon isn't always the most advanced or the most expensive. The best weapon is the one that's there, that works, and that gets the job done. So, did the M3 grease gun really turn the tide against Japanese forces? Not by itself. No single weapon ever does. But what it did do was give American soldiers the perfect tool for the war's absolute ugliest jobs. In the claustrophobic caves and fortified jungles of the Pacific, the M3 offered a winning combination of controllable firepower, compact size, and battlefield reliability. It was a weapon born from crisis, a crude tool dismissed at first as a cheap replacement for a legend. But on the brutal testing grounds of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, its true value shone through. Its light weight eased the burden on exhausted Marines, its compact frame let them fight where rifles couldn't, and its slow, steady rate of fire provided the stopping power needed to win. The story of the M3 is the story of how a $20 gun made of stamped metal gave American soldiers a crucial edge. It was never pretty, it was never a marvel of engineering, but it was a winner. It was a tool that embodied the American spirit of pragmatic, overwhelming force, and its quiet, chugging report became the sound of victory in the darkest corners of the war. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing. And let us know in the comments what other unsung hero of World War II deserves to have its story told. Until next time.